Hey, let's go ahead and get started. Take a look at the goodies over there. I hope you're already over there. If not, feel free to sneak over and get some. That's Chris and Mira over there. They're the ones responsible tonight. Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Mira. We're being served really well. Peggy last week and Chris and Mira this week. So if you can just help us one time with the snacks, there is a sign-up sheet back there. That'd be great. And if you're here, if this is anybody coming here the first time, you couldn't make it last week. Oh, good. Can you? Holy cow! Hey, we were already going to start. Actually, we're going to start. We want to meet some new people here. What's your name, please? Joanne. Okay, we got Joanne here. Oscar, stop having a good time. Okay, who else is new? Betty? Hi, Betty. Thank you. Brian? Thanks, Brian, for coming. Anybody else? Okay, we'll teach them the secret handshake later in the evening. And we'll sing the silly song and wear a hat. No, that's a Mexican restaurant. Never mind. Okay. Hey, it was a lot of fun. Last week we had some good questions at the end. We're trying to do a 15-minute Q&A. And Steve and I didn't know if it was going to be dead air for 15 minutes. We'd have to start singing duets, and that would drive everybody right out of the room. So instead, there were questions going like crazy. So we're going to do a little bit of a twist on it later tonight. So you have to wait for that for 8 o'clock. But then I got people emailing me things because they were so interested, and they didn't really have a chance to interact. And two people were interested in this thing about the Old Testament God killing all the Amalekites. And I think I told you last week that it used to be we thought we had to deal with people saying Christianity is mistaken. Jesus wasn't really the Messiah. The Gospels are later copies, and we don't know what the originals were like. Now the question is, can you really trust Christianity? It's got some evil in its past, and it's no good these days, et cetera, et cetera. So they'll pull out the Old Testament God and try to beat Christians over the head with that. But I liked, this is one Keith, I won't use last names, but anyway, I got this thing from Keith, and he said, if people ask you questions like that, a good place to start is to say, hey, that's a great question. Isn't that a good way to get going? I mean, that way you acknowledge the other person is asking something that's serious and something that deserves credit rather than, where are you coming up with that? Or who cares? Or so that's a really nice way to get going. And he said, note that he's taking the part in 1 Samuel that talks about the killing of the Amalekites. He says, first noted that it's Samuel's message of the Lord being given specifically to Saul. So in a sense, Saul is on the spot. What's he going to do with this commandment of God? The only thing is, it's other places in the Old Testament too, so you can't just hang everything on just the 1 Samuel part. It's in Joshua, it's in Deuteronomy, so we need good answers for that. And then, was that his? Oh, I went right past something I wanted to mention. He said it'd be great if you could provide a good reference for tough questions and corresponding answers. So I thought about two books. One I mentioned last week. It's called Is God a Moral Monster? And it's by Paul Copan. And Paul Copan spends, I don't know, maybe no more than a quarter of the book dealing with this thing about the killing in the Old Testament. But his other chapters are amazing. It's the kind of things that we're going to hear more and more of. God wants praise and sacrifice. He must be egotistical. What about child abuse of the binding of Isaac? Now, you and I think of that as just a wonderful story, but for some people, they consider that child abuse, taking a guy and tying him up and potentially putting him to death, a young guy. Things like the Bible's ubiquitous weirdness, kosher foods and kooky laws. I love that chapter title. If you remember an old show called West Wing, you remember that? Do you remember they had, I wish I'd brought it in, but we just don't have the time. They had an episode in which this woman, it was like a Dr. Ruth. Anybody know what I'm talking about? She comes in and she knows everything about the Bible. And so she sits there and he says, I'm so glad to have you here. And he just starts hammering her on, should we take our sons out and put them to death? Can you play football because you're dealing with a pigskin and that's illegal according to the Old Testament? And he just drops her down lower and lower and lower until she kind of slinks out of the room. And you see what he's doing? He's saying these Old Testament laws are stupid. And so Paul Copan takes that on, and he does a lot of things. Bride price in the Old Testament, he's got a chapter on that. So if you find that interesting, I think I sent everybody a link to Copan. Did you get that? It's a YouTube. It's like an hour long, so skip what you want or watch what you want. But he deals with a lot of these issues. It's his book, so that's good. And then the question about coming up with a section called Tough Questions and Corresponding Answers. About 5 or 6 years ago, we went through this book. It's called the Christian Combat Manual. And the guy that wrote it's right here in the county, and he's come to our class several times, Dan Story. And he's a terrific guy. And in the back of this book, and we did it. This was our book for 12 weeks. And in the back, he's got Socratic questions. And it's somebody makes a claim to you, and it's a bunch of questions that you can ask them. And I think because of time, I'm not going to get into that, but it's a really effective way to get a conversation going. Somebody says, I don't think there's a God. I don't trust the Old Testament. All religions are about the same. You hear that sort of thing. There's a plenty good questions that you can ask without having to come up with great answers. You can just throw the ball back in their court. So it's called the Christian Combat Manual. It's been out quite a while. I'm sure there's some cheap copies that you can get a hold of. The other person is another Keith, and he sent a note to me that said this. He says, I usually like to, if you get that question about, what about the Amalekites? God kills all these people. That's bad. That's wrong. That's evil. And he says, one way that you can start is to say, by the way, why do you think killing women and children is bad? And you see where you're going with that one? Where are you getting your standard of morality there? If you say that's bad, are you saying you just don't like it, or you think there's some kind of standard that's disobeying? And most people are going to say, well, there's some kind of standard there. It's not just I don't happen to like it. I find it distasteful. They're going to say, no, it's wrong. It's evil to just take innocent people and put them to death. So then the huge question is that these people are going to be digging a hole for themselves is, where are you coming up with that standard? And the standard will probably be, well, that's what society says. Well, that hole just got bigger. So we don't have time to get into that a lot tonight. But once you decide society decides morality, we're in trouble, aren't we? It's 51% get to say what morality is. Well, 51% 150 years ago thought slavery was okay. In India, they had sati, where they take the women and put them to death after the husband died. And we don't think that's right, but they did. And so are you going to base your morality on 51%? Morality is dependent upon somebody saying so. Anyway, so I appreciate that. I thought that was a real good way to go on that. All right, so let's do this real quickly then, because I want to save Steve plenty of time. I sent you 2 questions. And remember last fall, I said if you guys have anybody that you want to talk to and just kind of throw out some ideas, get a survey going about what are the skeptical comments, what are the questions people might have about Christianity, what have they heard people say that makes them question the whole concept of the religious faith. So these were the 2 I picked for this week because I thought that's a good place to start, the idea of God. One was somebody responded, I just don't think there's a God because there's not enough evidence. Somebody else apparently replied, why would a God care what we believe as long as we're nice to each other? So what do you think about this? What kind of evidence could you give somebody?
Well, the first thing I would ask is, what evidence would you accept? Because I could come up with a laundry list, but I'm not going to waste my time if they are going to just dismiss everything out of hand. Because I could come up with, the Kalam cosmological argument, the resurrection of Jesus, the non-life becoming life, things like that.
Sure.
So I could come up with a whole laundry list, but I would want to know from them, what would you accept as evidence? Kind of put them on the spot and set the ground rules. Because if there's nothing that they will accept, their skepticism meter is pegged. They're basically in denial. And they said, there's nothing I will accept that would make me believe in God. Well, then I won't waste my time.
Yeah. Some of you know Frank Turek. He wrote a book called I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist. He said when he's out talking to college kids, he does that a lot. He said one of the questions he asked them is, if I could prove to you that Christianity is true, would you become a Christian? In other words, is it really an intellectual problem you have, or is it a heart issue? And he says it's pretty interesting to see a lot of people say, no, I wouldn't become a Christian, even if you could prove it's true. Isn't that amazing? Even if you could prove it's true, because they don't want to bend the knee. Now there's somebody in charge of them, and they don't like that. So just because of selfish issue, I don't care if there's truth. So I see what you're saying there. Anybody think about that in other ways? Somebody says, I don't think there's enough evidence for God. Seems like somebody else had said something around here. Yeah, Bob.
I talked to an individual about the complexity of the human body, and he said, Do you think that evolved out of nothing? I mean, the heart, brain, and the way the body functions, do you think that was just something that came out of nothing?
Yeah.
And you can answer that.
Yeah, that's called the design argument. So, I mean, here are just a few of the things. The Big Bang. You get something from nothing. Well, how does that happen? That never happens. My bank account never gets bigger without me putting something in it, which is the hard part. So you don't get something from nothing. How about the start of life? Scientists are absolutely at dead ends here. How do you get life from non-life? They've got theory after theory after theory. They get these beginnings of life conferences. They had one at UCSD not too long ago, and they walk away more frustrated, more confused than they were before they had the meetings. How about the rise of consciousness? How does stuff turn into self-aware stuff? To know that it's stuff. That's called the problem of consciousness, the mind problem. It's like it's a problem because nobody can figure out how does a bunch of material stuff all of a sudden go, aha, that aha moment. Design, like Bob was talking about, on the big scale. 100 years ago, they used to think the universe and where the Earth was pretty insignificant, and it's just a run-of-the-mill planet and a run-of-the-mill solar system. It's kind of off in the suburbs. Nobody gives a hoot about it. And what they found in the last years is how perfect the Earth and the atmosphere and the kinds of planets that are outside the Earth and the way the sun has to be. You have to have the right kind of sun. You have to be in the right kind of solar system. You got to be in the right kind of galaxy. You got to be in the right kind of cluster of galaxies. You got to have gravity expanding at just the right rate. Any of those things go bad or change the dial slightly, you don't get life. So the fallback position, I bet some of you know this. So the fallback position is, well, yeah, our universe is perfect, but there are a zillion other universes out there. It's called the multiverse, which is kind of funny. To me, that's a cop-out because now you're talking metaphysics. You're not talking real physics. Nobody can prove there's another universe. We can only look at our universe. So, have fun with that. But that's kind of where they're going with that one. Morality, we've touched on that before. If things are really right and things are really wrong, it must be beyond us. Yeah, Nathan.
I was just reading this book recently, Greg Gansel. I think he's a professor at Biola, and he wrote a book called Our Deepest Desires, and he talks about actually beauty as an evidence for God, is that beauty makes the most sense. Beauty, love, and justice make the most sense if God exists.
Oh, yeah.
Whereas if he doesn't exist, there's no reason why we should even believe in those things.
Yeah, beauty serves no purpose, I guess, outside of just inspiring our soul. And all. Larry?
You mentioned the design. I think a lot of writers now go back to the DNA that just it's computer code, and it's used throughout life, and everybody that looks into it says, well, that was engineered, to how it works. And back when I was studying biology, they go, well, there's a lot of DNA in there that is nonsense DNA. It just was left over as creatures evolve. It doesn't use that DNA anymore. And then now they realize that, those are starting DNA for processes where, build a protein, okay, now stop building the protein, a specific protein. And it's so much more complex than Darwin could have ever guessed. And then they, in evolution, they used to say that, well, everything gradually changed over these bazillion years, and then couldn't find links to how this guy became that animal. And now they changed over and said, well, there was evolution was in jumps.
Mm-hmm.
They just had to make the evidence fit what they wanted it to be.
Punctuated equilibrium, they call that. Yeah. Yep. So we're living in a great time. I mean, it's just fun to watch some of these pompous people who thought they figured out how the universe ran, and they're kind of going back to Genesis rather than Darwin. Somebody who had a hand? Dan?
Just along those same lines, too, the second law of thermodynamics, isn't that basically the idea that everything's supposed to constantly break down? But in evolution, like you were talking about, it seems like we're supposed to believe that everything breaks up.
Yeah. But they'll get around it by saying that's in a closed system, and the Earth, because we're near the sun, it's pouring energy into us. Now, someday the sun will go dark, but right now there is more energy coming in than is lost. So they'll say that's how evolution works. So, you probably want to stay away from the second law argument because they'll say there are exceptions within parts of the universe where there's energy coming in. So here's the second question that some of you brought out. So I think the first one you guys can all hit home runs on. You had some great answers here. Why would God care? What's he going to worry about? As long as we're okay, we're kind to each other and take old ladies across the street and give to the poor and do all this kind of stuff.
How about the obvious fact that people aren't all nice to each other? So in the hypothetical world where everyone was nice to each other, then maybe you wouldn't need God.
Yeah.
But the hardcore truth of it is that we're not nice to each other. So there's no answer.
Plus, don't you think we elevate ourselves, that we pat ourselves on the back probably more than we should? If we were really honest and thought about what our typical week is like, even a single day, all of the things we should have done that we didn't do and all the things we did do that we shouldn't have done. I mean, we're so kind on ourselves. Hey, I'm no Adolf Hitler. Oh, that's a real standard. I mean, we do awful things every day. So why does God care if we do bad things? Well, isn't he going to overlook it and say, well, you're just human? What kind of God do we worship? Yeah, a holy God. A God that says, my standard is not here or here, Adolf Hitler, or even Mother Teresa. It's like up there somewhere. Nobody's going to reach that standard. It's sin that you're going to walk in the presence of God? I don't think so. The problem is not what you believe. The problem is what you're dragging around. It's sin. You can try to talk it away, but we all feel that guilt, don't we, inside of us? We all know we fall. We not only fall short, well, I try to live by the 10 Commandments. Well, really. But beyond that, we fall short of our own standards, don't we? Every day. I always go, wow, that was stupid. That was wrong. I can't believe I did that. So we fall short of our, we convict ourselves, I think, on a daily basis. So the problem's not the belief, it's the sin that we carry around. And now, this is the only individual who's ever taken care of that sin problem. So it is important what you believe. You want to stand in front of God as you are and try to worm your way in. Okay, well, try it, see what happens. But better to stand in the place of having Christ stand in your place, in a sense, wearing the righteousness of Christ. Having him taken care of all of those sins, past, present, and future, and you show up and God lets you in as a child of God. Not just, well, I'll let you in the back door. You go in as the child of God. So I appreciate you guys. If you think of more questions, please let me know. I'll keep working on these. We'll probably only do a couple every week. But at least, you can just treat it as a survey, too. You don't have to have answers. You can just go to people and say, hey, we're doing something in our class, and we're dealing with issues that people have with Christianity. What do you think keeps people? You don't even have to say, why don't you like Christianity? You can keep it real fuzzy. Why do you think people are not buying into Christianity these days? So that's powerful stuff. All right, so I'm going to pray, and then Steve's going to come up and do the main message of the evening here. Father, I thank you for a chance to get together, and I thank you for our curiosity, and I thank you for our capacity for understanding that you've given us. You've given us a mind, and I pray that we'll use it effectively here, and I pray that you bless Steve as he presents a message that we need to hear, and I pray that we can apply it then and not just walk out with a bunch of head knowledge. I pray this in your son's name. Amen.
If you haven't already, please sign in with your email, because we give out the handout that I will be working off of through email. So if you could do that, I have some handouts, especially for those who are first-timers, and I have about 20, and hopefully, oh, that's not the handout. Here it is. So we'll pass them back, and if you could, couples can share one handout, and go ahead and if you're new and you need one, go ahead and take one. If you sit near the front row, you're likely to get one. If you're not, wait till the email comes, and we'll send you a copy of tonight's presentation. Well, thank you, Gary, on answering some of those questions. And we're going to do part 2 of this tactics, and then we'll move on to something else. But this is going to be a real important night as we wrap that up. How many people love tests? You love tests, like taking tests. How many people like taking tests? Well, there's a few of you. Most of you don't. I don't, unless I'm prepared. If I'm prepared, bring it on. Give me that test. I'll take it. I know all the answers. And it is the same thing in spiritual conversations. Many times we don't like to get into them because we don't think we're prepared. We're scared, just like in test taking. But if you are prepared, boy, you welcome opportunities to talk to people. And so this is going to be another evening will help you in furthering your knowledge of spiritual conversations. Now, over the years, I've had a lot of conversations with Jehovah's Witnesses. And I have gone long term with them. I've gone 9 months with 2 Jehovah's Witnesses, coming to my house weekly. I've gone 18 months with 2 Jehovah's Witnesses coming to my house. Now, what happens after each long period of time is I get a big X on my house. Why? Because I haven't converted to becoming a Jehovah's Witness. So they X my house. But 2 years later, the X seems to fade. And then they come by. And so recently I was out front doing some yard work. And these 2 Jehovah's Witnesses came up and we just started talking. To me, I'm so relaxed and so comfortable. Why? Because I know a lot about them and I have a lot of experience and I know how to ask questions. And so I started asking questions and we're having this good time. And then the lady says, I know you. You used to teach at Grant Middle School. She worked in the main office. And so we immediately connected. And so it had a personal touch to it. And so when they left, they, of course, handed me a magazine. They said, do you want this? I said, of course I do. And so I always take their materials. 1 month later, they come to my door. The X, I think, has faded. They're at my door, and they want to come and talk to me a little bit. And I said, do you want to stay and talk? You're welcome. You're welcome to come on in. And they said, no, we have friends that were out walking around the streets, and so we can't come in this time, but maybe we'll have a future date to come in. But do you want another magazine from us? And I said, absolutely. I'll take your Awake. And they handed me their Awake. Now, confidence comes from experience, from some knowledge, and the ability to ask good questions. And you're going to see that you don't have to be a scholar to ask questions. No matter where you are on the road, when you think of yourself walking along a road, and those that are further this way maybe know a lot more about sharing their faith, but maybe you're at the beginning steps of the road. That's okay. I'm glad you're here. I'm glad we have so many here. This is, to me, extremely exciting. So what I'd like to do is kind of do a quick review, but I want to use an illustration to give you an idea of how apologetics fits in as a ministry in the church. This might give you a big picture. All right, as a ministry, the foundation of what we believe is the triune God. One God subsists in 3 persons, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, co-equal and co-eternal. The triune God is the creator of the universe, the foundation of the church. Everything relies on the triune God. Then comes theology, which is the study of God. And it is the Bible that gives us the background information as we develop our doctrines for the church. Then comes apologetics. And apologetics is simply to make a case for Christianity. It is a way that we can give a reason for the hope that we have. 1 Peter 3:15. It's boots on the ground. When people have questions of theology, apologetics helps us. When there's questions on the culture, on philosophy, on science, or anything like Gary was saying, it's apologetics that has the answers. And then what we're hoping is that you will become an ambassador for Christ. You already are, but we want to make you a better ambassador for Christ. 2 Peter 5:20 says that we are ambassadors for Christ as if God is making his appeal through us. And if we're going to represent the king, we need to be a good representative. That's why you're here. You're here to be a better ambassador for Christ. And an ambassador has knowledge, wisdom, and character. And so that's the foundation of the class, is we're going to hit one of those areas. This tonight how to ask questions is more along the lines of wisdom. Then we get up to sharing God's grace. God's grace is embodied in everything we do. In fact, it starts and ends with God. And everybody here who says they profess Jesus Christ as Lord has experienced that grace, not because of anything you did. I look at my heart and I can't even understand why Christ would come into my life. But because of that grace that each of us have been shown, it should just come out of us that we want to share it. And that's what we're going to try to help you to do tonight, is so that you can be better at sharing your faith. So hopefully that gives you a better idea, a big picture of why we're here and why you're here. All right, last week, what did we learn about questions? Well, it's a way to start a conversation. When Jehovah's Witnesses come, I immediately go right into question mode and start filing off one question after another and let them do all the talking. Takes the pressure off me. And it's interactive. I'm not going to lecture to them. With Jehovah's Witnesses, they are the teachers. See, they have a mindset. They're there to teach you. So I just take the part of the learner and say, let's talk. I got lots of questions. Let me ask you some questions. So that's what we learned last week about questions. We also learned that the first Columbo question, this is based, we asked last week, and if you're young, I hope you know who Lieutenant Columbo is, but Columbo asked questions. He was this bumbling detective who was brilliant, okay? And he always asked questions. And so questions give us information about their view so that we can follow up on it. And second, it makes them think more carefully. The what question, they have to know what they're talking about. So, how many used that last week? Raise your hand if you used the what question last week. That was your homework. 1, 2. Oh, come on. You were supposed to ask what questions. What did you come up with, Keith?
Well, my wife asked me to do something.
Oh, I love it. And what did you ask?
What exactly do you mean by that?
You said I have to do the dishes. What do you mean by that? You said take out the trash. What do you mean by that? What trash? Which room? Well, I encourage you to not only use it when you can and think about it when you use it, but use it when you're watching TV. If you watch, especially in this world of politics, it's a great question to ask the TV. Well, so-and-so, what do you mean by that? It's practice, finding ways to practice. You can do it at home in front of your TV. The TV, it doesn't respond back, but that's okay. You have a safe place to practice it. All right, today, we're going to look at how to reverse the burden of proof. We're going to tell you what that is. And then second, we're going to get to the second question. And then I'll mention the third, but we really won't go into detail on the third question. All right, so reversing the burden of proof. So again, the first application, what do you mean by that, was simply to get clarification, get understanding, and make them think about what they're presenting. Now, the second one is going to shift the burden of proof. The burden of proof is the responsibility of the person who makes the claim. They have to back it up. And there's a cardinal rule. The rule is this: whoever makes the claim bears the burden. Whoever makes the claim bears the burden. Someone says that the Bible is full of errors. What evidence do you have? How do you know that? They're making the claim. Usually, we make an answer. Rather than answering, we're going to fire it back at them and put it where it belongs. They make the claim. They bear the burden. Now, we're going to learn how to put it in their court. That's what this second question does. Now, what it does also is that there's no free rides. Most non-Christians are not used to having the ball put back in their court. Amen to that? When you talk to people and they just throw things out at you, if you have some knowledge, you want to answer it. Well, rather than answer it, you're going to make them give evidence for it is what you're going to do, because they bear the burden. And we don't have to defend against their claims or opinions. Make them support it first. And we are not to argue opinions. Let me give you an example. I have 3 kids. Well, when I say kids, 40 is the oldest, and so it's kind of a misnomer to call them 3 kids. But understand, when they were teenagers at home, they would argue about the dumbest things. Well, actually, they thought they were really important. Like, who's the best rock band out there? Some would say U2. Some would say Radiohead or Pearl Jam. And then they would start arguing. I said, whoa, 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 whoa. What are you arguing for? That's just their opinion. Ask them, why is Pearl Jam the best band? Ask the why question. You know, my kids are hard to argue with now. You teach them how to argue, and they can out-argue me. So I got to be careful around them because they're really good at it. But that's what you want. You want your kids, you want your grandkids to know how to use good tactics in conversations. And that's what this is. There's nothing illegitimate about it. It's not trickery, it's nothing. It's just good common sense. And it's putting the ball where it belongs. It's a tennis match, and you want to put the ball in their court as much as you can. Because many times people throw out slogans. Am I right? They throw out slogans that they've heard from someplace else. And when you ask the question, what do you mean by that? Or how did you come to that conclusion? They go, they don't know what to do, because nobody has made them define it or back it up or support it. And it is the person who puts the claim, they're the one who bears the burden. Now, this is important, is alternative explanations or illustrations are not an argument. Here's how that works out. I've talked to New Agers before, and I've made the claim that Jesus is the only way to heaven. And to refute that, they come out with what they call the blind man and the elephant, or the blind men and the elephant. How many have heard the blind men and the elephant thrown at you? That is an illustration. It is not an argument. What it is to refute that Jesus is the only way. They talk about, I'm not going to go into detail on this, but these 6 blind men are touching the elephant, and they're describing what they touch, but it's all wrong. They grab the trunk, and one says that it's like that the elephant's like a hose, and they grab the leg, and it's like a tree trunk, and they're all wrong. And the idea is that all religions have a piece of the truth. And so no one has a corner on the truth, is what we're trying to say to you as they use that. That is not an argument, is the point. That is simply an illustration. And you could say something like, well, you seem to be implying that every religion has part of the truth. How do you know that? So you just skip the illustration. If you don't know how to answer it, you don't have to answer it. Just go around it, because it's not an argument. It's just an illustration. So you say that we all have part of the truth. How do you know that? The illustration now is useless. They have to back it up. Does that make sense, what I just said? I said I talk with a lot of Jehovah's Witnesses. I'm going to tell you, when they get stuck on scriptures, they go to a story. They have a story. They have been trained to tell stories. And they get angry at me when I point that out. I'll just say something like, and you're probably going to think this is rude, but that's a nice story, but what scriptural evidence do you have? And they get a little red face and the steam comes out. But that's the bottom line. They can come up with stories. People from all belief systems can have stories. Stories are not arguments. Illustrations are not arguments. Don't bite. Don't try to explain. Maybe you want to try to explain the blind man and the elephant, but you don't have to, is my point. You can get right to the point. What do you mean by that? So that brings us to this second question is, now, how did you come to that conclusion? How did you come to that? What did you mean by that? Second question, how did you come to that conclusion? Now, what it does is it graciously asks the person, you're just using good social skills. You're graciously asking the person for their belief right there. It's interactive. It's not preachy. You're not slamming anything down their throats. You're just saying, what are your reasons for your view? Now, it gives them a chance to support their view. If they know what they're talking about, then now they've got a chance to give that. It also gives you more things to work with. When you hear their response, you listen. This is another skill we need to have in any conversation, is the skill of listening. I've had to work on it to get better at listening and making sure I'm paying attention to their response. Because the truth is, that's going to lead to the third question, is based on whatever they say. And then again, it shifts the burden of proof. It puts the ball in their court. That's what I think of all the time when I'm talking with somebody. I want to keep the ball in their court as much as possible. Takes the pressure off. I don't have to know everything. They just have to support their view. And then I have to listen. I can ask more what questions. I can ask more, why do you believe that? Why should I believe it? And don't be surprised if you get a blank stare, because nobody's done that to them. Reverse the burden of proof. Put it in their court. They're not used to it. They're used to us stumbling through an answer, trying to refute an opinion. And like I said before, we don't refute opinions. You got to recognize opinions. They just throw them out. The Bible is based on mythology. All these ancient gods, that's where the resurrection comes from. It's just copying those ancient gods. That's an assertion, that's an opinion. You don't need to try to answer that. That's interesting about those gods. What do you mean by that? Or I sometimes just jump right to the second question. I just say, how did you come to that conclusion? What is your evidence that the resurrection copied that? Again, then you just sit there. See how much fun that is? The pressure's off. They bear the burden. Just sit back. And that's why I'm so much of the time I'm so relaxed, is because I know that they bear the burden of proof, not me. So there's also variations. How did you come to that conclusion? Can be, why do you believe that? What is your evidence? There's lots of variations. Those are just two sample variations of that. Just how can we get that in their court? Now, this is going to take some practice. My encouragement is to do better this time and take it home and at least try both questions. Talk to the TV. How did you come to that conclusion is a great question when somebody on TV spouts off something really strong and you're listening, you're going, that's only an opinion. How did you, Mr. So-and-so, how did you come to that conclusion? It's a great way to begin practicing. I think like that. I'm listening to these people and I immediately see opinions are being thrown around, and I'm hoping the host will ask the question, how did you come to that conclusion? Because I'm asking it from the audience as I'm watching TV. Can you do this? Is this something everybody in this room can do? Everybody can be successful at this. And that's what I want. We're making ambassadors for Christ, and questioning is a great way to begin that process. And you know what? My poor PowerPoint didn't sit inside the thing. Jesus asked questions. Are you aware of that? How many times Jesus asked questions? All the time. That was kind of his MO. You know, he loved to put the ball in their court to see if they could answer it. So Jesus in Mark 3:22 and 23, Jesus had just been healing people. And the Jewish religious leaders confront him. And this is what they say. The scribes came down from Jerusalem and were saying, he is possessed by Beelzebub, and he casts out demons by the ruler of the demons. All right, they've made this accusation. This is an assertion. Now, Jesus could have launched out and started answering it, which we would do, which I would do. Many times I just launch off and start answering it instead of sitting back and asking a good question. And here's how Jesus handled it brilliantly. And he called them to himself and began speaking to them in parables. How can Satan cast out Satan? You see, they wanted to attribute his miracles to demonic activity, to Satan. And so if his miracles are from Satan and he's casting out Satan, he's working against himself. And so he's going to put the ball back in their court. How can Satan cast out Satan? I'll bet those religious leaders were like, you want to answer him? No, why don't you answer him? Now, I'm not going to answer him. They had to be dumbfounded. And I'll tell you, right there, I would have just walked away because they were probably shaking their heads. But Jesus didn't walk away. He went off and started telling more parables. So Jesus used the Columbo tactic, even though Columbo wasn't alive then. He invented the Columbo tactic. How about that? Columbo got it from Jesus. Let's put it that way. All right, let's look at some questions, and we'll see how you can do as a class. And we'll do this first one. This first one says morals. Now, remember, it's a non-Christian saying morals are just an invention of culture. How many have ever heard that? Huh? Multiple times if you talk to people. There are no objective or universal moral rules. Okay? So that's been thrown at you. Now, you could start with a what question. When you say morals, what do you mean by that? But tonight we're focused on the second question, so we're going to skip a step and we're going to jump to it. How do you know that there are no objective moral rules or no universal moral rules? How do you know that? See how easy? A lot of times I skip the first question because I think I know what they mean, and I go right to the second question because the second question is powerful. It's asking for proof. It's asking for evidence. And again, ball's back in their court. The heat's off of me. All right, the miracles of Jesus in the Gospels were an invention of the early church. Turn to somebody, come up with the second question. How would you skip the first question? How would you answer it? Turn to somebody quickly. Say, okay, finish your last thought. All right, now you got some courage. You've answered. Some of you have answered. You've got some courage now. Share out what you could ask. Yes.
It's how do you, we know the right question now to ask, but how do you rebut that without being abrasive and opening a dialogue where Christ.
Okay, the question is, how do we rebut that objection? We don't have to until we make a claim. You see, if we don't make a claim, we don't have anything that we have to back up. Oh,
It's easy to provide an answer to that, but leave room where it doesn't come off aggressive, abrasive, and loving, so you can open the door.
That's a great question. In fact, Gary kind of gave a hint to it, that when they start answering it, they may ask you a question back based on it, and you can say something that Gary said was, you know what, that's a great question. And if I don't know the answer, I can always say, can I get back to you?
Like that, I can say, oh, that's a great statement. I mean, that's
well, no, but they're gonna answer in some way, and you can also say, you know what, that's a good point. But here's what about this part? You can point out there's a good point, and you can just say, that's a great answer. I pointed this out last week, but Nathan and I meet with Mormons, and this is what happens. We ask them questions, they answer, and we listen, and it's okay to rebut their answers, but do it in a gracious manner. It's your tone. It's how relaxed you are. It's body language. If I'm aggressively, now when I speak, I sometimes get a little passionate here, but in real life, I will sit back more and say, let me show you what maybe is a different way to put it. Then I'll say it, and then I'll finish with a question. How does that sound? I'll maybe give a counter solution. I'll say, how does that sound to you? So that's a way that, yes, by ending with questions. Great question. I like that. Yes, Nathan.
Coco also makes a good point in his book is that you don't have to seal the deal during the conversation. You can keep it going and build a relationship first along the way.
Yes. And we have a golden rule. I don't know if I mentioned it last week, but if I didn't, the golden rule is that we always let them save face. If we corner them to the point where they're gonna probably break off this relationship, Nathan or I will say, you can't know everything. You don't have all the resources, and that's okay. Or we come up with an alternate explanation that undoes our own explanation. Nathan's really good at undoing everything I say. But we want them to save face, and I think that's that's part of it. And the other part, I think, the best part is finishing with a question and put it. How does that sound to you? And be gracious at everything you say. Think of the person as your best friend. You don't want to offend your best friend, and that's what I think. When a JW or a Mormon, or if I'm on the street an atheist or anything, this atheist is my best friend. And I do not want to be offensive. I want to treat this person with gentleness and respect. And so I will try to use language that brings them in rather than repels them away. But doesn't mean I'm not going to give them the truth. I'm not going to hold back the truth. I'm going to give them the truth, but I'll try to do it as nicely as I can. Sharing the truth in love is what the Bible says.
I was going to say, when we're meeting with Mormon missionaries, we've made friendships, probably about 6 or 7 of them in the last year that they rotate out. We still keep in contact with some of them.
Yes.
And when we'll challenge them, sometimes they'll say the same thing to us. It's like, well, I don't know the answer to that. Can I bring it up the next time we meet? We're like, sure, go right ahead. And so we keep that dialogue going with them. And like right now, we're talking with them about the reliability of the Book of Mormon and why they think the Book of Mormon is the Word of God. And we've been going back and forth on this for a couple of weeks, and we'll say with them, hey, go and do the research, and we'll do our research, and we'll talk about it. And then we'll meet again next week. It's not even really with this, it's not a formula. You can do this in any way that's appropriate for conversation.
Does that answer your question? Does that help? That just think of it as you're talking to your best friend. Oh, you rip each other, huh? Your wife, okay? Or your spouse. How you talk to your spouse is the way we talk to people who need Jesus. Yes, Larry.
Like going back to the actor, like Columbo, I think he would soften it maybe sometimes like, I'm not sure I understand how you
Yes, we can soften it.
Yeah, how do you go ahead? I don't understand. There's something we could do.
Yeah, it's kind of hard. If I was in real life and you watched me, if you came and watched me or watched Nathan and you'd see us in action, you'd see how gentle we are. And it's because we want them to keep coming back. And so, they're coming over for dinner on the 9th, Friday the 9th, because our house is open to them. And they're our best friends. All right, let's try this one. Reincarnation was taken out of the Bible. Yeah, go ahead. Yes.
I had, in reading a Sean McDowell book, he was talking about how you build relationships with people and discussing it. And he kind of described it as a situation like two beggars on the street, where one is just telling the other beggar where they found bread. And I thought it was a good illustration for the approach, because that's essentially what we are. We're all beggars.
Yes. So Josh McDowell called us beggars, and he's exactly right. And there's a humility to it. I guess maybe that is the key. If you walk into these conversations with a humble attitude And it's God's grace that is going to change somebody, not my arguments. God will use my arguments to change somebody, but I can't. But God can. And so it's a very humbling enterprise to share with these individuals, and how tough it is to sometimes share tough truth. But we've got to. You can't let relationship be over truth. That's my point. There are some times when you really have to hit the issue hard. In stranger evangelism, you can hit harder than in relational evangelism. That is the pitfall of relational evangelism, and is that you may soften everything. And you never get to the gospel of how they can be saved because you're trying to be too nice. And so I'm just saying you can do both. But over time, it's like turning the heat under a pan and heat it up slowly. But you got to get to the hot, and you got to send some hot things at them. And these guys have got some really tough ones thrown at them that they're going to tell us a week from Friday. But I didn't know if they're going to come back. This was so tough. And gosh, they immediately said, yes, we'll be there for dinner. We're looking forward to it. So we didn't offend. That's what friends do not walk away from friends. That's the key. Oh, reincarnation was taken out of the Bible. Just anybody on reincarnation was taken out of the Bible. What?
Or was it the Bible?
Okay. Okay, yeah. How did you know? How do you know this? Why should I believe this? Why do you believe this? And then a good God would never allow evil. Gary next week is going to talk about the problem of evil. But I was at a Christmas party, and I think I spoke about this last year, but it's worth repeating. I'm at a Christmas party. I'm sitting with my nephews and nieces at the kids' table, but they're not kids. They're college age and college graduates. So they're asking me questions about the Bible, and there's a gentleman to my right who says, everybody knows that the Bible is full of contradictions. I have a Bible sitting there that's sitting on right in front of me, and I looked to him. I said, sir, I heard that. Can you show me one? See, it's a question. He made the claim. He has to bear the burden. And so I asked him to show me one, and instead of showing me one, he said a good God would not allow evil. That's his way out. Well, let me walk through the conversation. We then ended up in this conversation, and I don't know how well it'll come out, but here it is. What is the contradiction of a good God allowing evil? And the gentleman said, because a good God would not allow evil. How do you know that? There I am, going right to the second question. It's just common sense. Then I said, are you saying God couldn't have a good reason for allowing evil? He said, absolutely. I said, how do you know that? And do you know the mind of God? And he said, I don't know God's mind. No one can know the mind of God. Then I said, if you don't know the mind of God, how can you claim to know he doesn't have a good reason for allowing evil? And he just sat there, dumbfounded, and changed the subject to attack the Bible. So now we're talking about whether we can trust the Bible. He just shifted gears. He knew he could not answer that. But tone-wise, it was just, well, how do you? I kind of yell it here, but that's not the way it comes across in the conversation. Yes.
Well, when he changes the subject, don't you just say, "Wait a minute"?
No, I leave it there because that's the first stone. I'm going to get another stone in his shoe in just a second. And my nieces and nephews are sitting there, and they got pen and paper out, and they're taking notes as I'm sharing. It was a real-life training at a Christmas party. Because then I went through 6 evidences why we can trust the Bible, and they're writing them all down. And then I debriefed them a week later on the phone. They put the phone on speakerphone, and I did a debriefing through the whole conversation. So it was a great teaching opportunity, and I got a chance to put a stone in this gentleman's shoe. Now, you got to keep in mind, I've said this multiple times, is that that's going to be later. Is that the tone is very important. It's not a sass, it's a humble tone. It's a gracious tone that Josh McDowell talked about. So I would say, well, how do you know that? Okay, calming down. Here, I'm not going to calm down. This is just who I am when I speak. But in real life, I'm very calm and relaxing and inviting. I'm trying to invite them into the conversation. So we got to be careful with our tone. I'm not condemning them. I'm not jumping down their throats. I want to invite discussion. I want them to feel relaxed around me. And it keeps you in the driver's seat as long as you ask questions. The person who asks the question controls the conversation. Let me repeat that. The person who asks the questions controls the conversation. And you don't have to defend anything if you haven't brought anything forward. As soon as you put something on the table, then they can start asking you questions. All right? So, but there's going to be a time when you do have to back it up. And so that's why you're here. We're going to give you the content that goes with it. Now, don't sweat if you don't know where to go next. Okay? Don't sweat if you don't know where to go next. And we'll get to the third. Well, we won't get to the third tactic. The third tactic, all that is listening to their response and trying to find a hole in their response. You can either ask another what question, you can ask a how did you come to that conclusion question, or if you found what we call a logical fallacy. If there's something missing in their response, then you can go for that. And that's what it is to get to the third question. So first question is what? Columbo question. What do you mean by that? And the second question is, how did you come to that conclusion? And it's reversing the burden of proof. Remember, we don't have to force the conversation. We can quit when it's appropriate. And you can use these at any time, any place, any conversation. Yes?
So how does the process change or differ? Like, all of this is assuming you have kind of an ongoing relationship with someone and you're going to have the opportunity to revisit things. But if you're on an airplane and you start having a conversation and you're not going to get another opportunity, I think, at this point, to get back to Jesus, to get back to the point. What part of this do you skip, or how do you jump ahead? Or?
I watch the people. I watch the people as I'm asking questions, as I'm sharing and answering their questions. I'm watching them. If they're opposing me and just, I don't agree with that, then when the plane lands, it's, nice meeting you, and I walk away. I walk away relaxed, because if they don't respond, I don't believe that the Holy Spirit is working in them at that moment. But if they do respond, and it happened one time on an airplane, I'm sitting there and the movie Contact was on. And if you know anything about the Contact, it's about intelligent life in another planet. And I knew that would relate to intelligent design. So I started asking questions about the movie Contact. She started to agree with me. I didn't know what to do. Nobody agrees with me. And she starts saying, yeah, that makes sense. I never thought of that. And so I'm realizing, as I'm seeing us start to descend, I'm thinking, I need to move to Jesus. And so I did. And as far as I know, she agreed with the gospel as we're landing. But I waited till I saw a response. And so on those one-time deals, if there's no response, just go as far as you can. If they're not moving towards Jesus, you can let it drop, because there's no pressure on you to do that. That's my point of view, that you don't have the pressure. It's very relaxing. I don't save anyone. Our job is to share. Jesus is the one who saves. And that makes it sure makes it easy. Takes the pressure off me. Bob, you got something?
Well, it sounds like you're giving her your opinion.
Yeah.
You're not trying to force it on her. You're just giving your opinion and let her draw a conclusion.
It's a back and forth. That's what it is. The back and forth. And yes, again, we're not trying to force anything on anybody. Yes.
Something else to keep in mind is, Michael says in his book Tactics that sometimes you don't have to swing the home run. You don't have to get right across. Sometimes it's just important to get on first base so that someone else can get home. Buckets.
Well, you don't need a home run. You don't even need a single. In this class, you don't need a single. You just need to get up to bat. That's all we're encouraging you to do. Get up to bat. And we're trying to give you some tools to do that. And so, practice. Practice. What do you mean by that? And how did you come to that conclusion? If you do it on your own, just do it watching television, especially the news. When you watch the news, listen to the newscasters. Are they just throwing out opinions? And if they are, practice. What do you mean by that? And how did you come to that conclusion? Next week, Gary's taking on the easy topic of the problem of evil. That came up last week. He's going to give more information and really tie it together in a nice bow. So now Gary's going to come up, and this is where we start answering questions. You can ask questions. You don't have to stay on topic. You can ask questions about anything, and we have a new rule, and it's on us. As soon as the question is asked, Alan back there has a egg timer, and it's going to be 4 minutes. We've got 4 minutes to answer. If the bell goes off and we're not done, we just finish what we said, and we're moving on. That way we can get more questions if we have this 4-minute rule. We stole this from Stand to Reason. Okay, don't think it's original to us. So, also Richard is in the back. Raise your hand if you have a question. Richard will run over and throw the mic. No, not throw the mic. Hand you the mic, and you can ask your question. Last week this was easy. Oh, we got one over here. We got Bob over here. No. You got to wait for the mic. We got our mic man.
I'm curious to know how many non-believers have the two of you converted?
Well, remember, none. We don't save anybody. But have I had the opportunity to watch God save someone while I'm talking to you? I don't have a number. What's hard is you don't know for sure that they've come to know Jesus Christ. Even if they profess a faith, you need to see their lives worked out. And so I would say a handful. I've talked to children. I get pulled in to talk to kids. And if you offer ice cream to believe in Jesus, the whole room will say, so here's, oh, it's cookies with adults. I don't know. I just know I've seen some adults say, yes, I want to follow Jesus and pray to receive Jesus, but I can't tell you how many because I don't know for sure. So let's just say a handful. God knows how many. I'll let him be the numbers guy.
My favorite story is I teach the Bible as literature out of Palomar, and we teach it as literature, not as theology. And I always tell my students that. Nobody's getting baptized. We're just doing literature. So I had one hardcore guy in there, and he was in one of my other classes. He said, hey, what else are you teaching? I said, well, I have a Bible class. And he said, oh, I think maybe I'll take that. I'm going, oh, man, because he was a hardcore. Used to insult people in the class. And okay. So he's in the class, and I don't see any change. And then after the semester was out, he came up to me about 6 months later, and he said, my life was a mess right then. He said, the Bible spoke to me, and he said, I'm a Christian. And I thought, maybe, like Steve says, how long is this going to last? So I've kept track of this guy. He's getting married this year. Sharon and I invited up there. The guy is just a solid Christian all the way through. And it was the Bible, so it's not even me, which is nice. I would have screwed it up somehow, but the Bible spoke to him. So those things happen.
I want to start with a little background context. One of my best friends, she's a master's graduate from Brown in theology who's an atheist. Yeah.
Sounds like an oxymoron.
To study something and believe in it, two separate things. Maybe
Yeah.
she's looking. But when we did get into a discussion about her problem between monotheism in the biblical sense, she brought up the story of Jephthah from, I can't even remember what book that's from, but where a human sacrifice had to be offered up. And he said, how can that God permitted human sacrifice, and I was stuck on that.
So you're stuck because that for God to make people offer up somebody. You're saying that's so you're taking that back to the story about Abraham and Isaac again?
No, Jephthah.
No, but I mean, so how would that affect Christianity?
But that wasn't because, this person had to go. Jephthah had to go through with the human sacrifice, whereas.
But what was the purpose of that? I mean, what was accomplished through that sacrifice? Is that
Jephthah? Are you familiar with the story?
No.
Why don't we pass the mic? You look that up, and we'll pass the mic. Who else? A question? Oh, you got it now.
In the book of Judges, Jephthah was.
Jephthah.
Jephthah.
Well, I mean, that's the way I've always heard it.
Jephthah.
Okay, Jephthah.
Jephthah.
He's the first thing that he sees. He's promising God, the first thing I see, I'll sacrifice. You know, if you read that story, there may not have been a loss of life. This woman may have been set apart for the Lord, and maybe a case of her becoming the equivalent of a nun. I've heard variations of that. It's not set in stone that she was put to death.
What's also not set in stone is the fact that God honored that. That was his. He did that. He made that pledge to God, but that doesn't mean God supported what he was making that pledge. So your friend is drawing a conclusion that isn't in the scriptures. He made the pledge. He's the one who fulfilled it, but that doesn't mean God honored it.
Isn't that interesting, by the way, that we've had last week and this week, a lot of questions are going to the Old Testament because a lot of people see that as odd and they want to go after those things when we say Jesus is the fulfillment and it's a new covenant, but they want to pull out these things that are odd. There's no doubt about it. There's some odd things there.
Okay, another question. Back there with Keith.
I'll give you another easy one.
Yeah, but this time, Steve.
Yeah, whoever, both of you guys. About 4 or 5 times I've gotten this question on the streets, and it comes in various formats. Usually it's in a group of people, and it's the strongest person in the group that asks the question because they're the most boisterous and aggressive. The question is, and I'll form it two or three ways. For instance, I'm part of the LGBTQ community. You guys hate us. So your story isn't for us. Or what does God think about homosexuals? That's in general that format. You guys either hate us, or the Bible hates us, or God hates us, or God's an evil God because he hates us, or it is, what is your God, or what's the Bible say about me? Type of approach. How would you respond to that?
That is a tough issue just because these are gut level issues, aren't they? People say, I have a gay friend, I have a gay, somebody in the family. And so when you go after that, it is really hard and it's dangerous and it's a tough situation because people are connected through friendships in this area. I always say, that I always hate that word homophobia because Christians don't fear homosexuals. They fear for them because of the lifestyle and because of what's going on there. I mean, it's not a healthy lifestyle no matter how you look at it, and psychologically it's not healthy. I don't know that you want to bring that up with somebody because that is hammering them over the head. Because for this LGB, et cetera, that becomes an identity, doesn't it? So you're not just going after, quote, a sin or something. You're going after their identity. You're saying that's not good what you are, and that's how many of them identify themselves. It's the first thing they think of. They wrap themselves in that rainbow flag. That's them. And it makes it really hard to attack that. There are plenty of good books that are available. Best thing I can think of is Alan Schleman's book. It's called, is it called The Ambassador's Guide to Homosexuality? Right?
Yeah, yes.
And, I mean, we don't have time really, with 3 or 4 minutes here to get in the whole thing. But you got to get a good book that talks about the sensitive ways to talk to people and deal with people.
Yeah, I would, in this particular situation, I might use a question when you say hate your group. What do you mean by that?
Yeah, I can tell you, I've been through iterations of how I've answered it. Then I went back home to my wife and told her the story. She goes, "Here's what you ought to do. Here's what you ought to." So I've modified my response. So the 2 times ago, here's how I approached it, and I'll give you a 30-second answer. Hopefully, it won't go past that. What I say is, I'll answer your question, but first let me tell you this. And then I basically give a short version of the gospel. And what I do is I say, God sees my sin just as ugly as he sees it in anybody else. And I said, and God loves you and cares for you just as much as he does me or anybody else because he created you. He created you uniquely. He created you specifically. He gave you a job to do on this planet. And my encouragement to you is, if you don't have a Bible, I'll give you one. But if you do have one or can get on the internet, read it. Go through there, study that, look at that. And this one girl said, well, it's interesting you say that because I just started reading it. So it's interesting. If you pray before you go out and talk to people, pray while you're talking to them, and pray after you talk to them. I think perfect. 30 seconds.
Thank you, Keith. Some good insights. What else? Other questions? You got science, you got culture, you got all kinds of stuff.
Yeah, I'll follow up with you guys on maybe email some of the specific questions, but could you maybe hit on just some of the ideas around, relative morals, or maybe the concept of how morals have evolved, and that's how we all have a set of them. We know what's good because good stuff has evolved and kept with us. Just some basic arguments against that.
I don't have the date, but I'm doing a whole evening on that topic. So if you don't mind, we'll save that. You're gonna have to be here for a few weeks in order to hear that. Okay, but I'm going to touch on that subject. Do objective morals exist, or can you make an argument for the existence of God through morality? There's lots of ways to go with it, and so we're going to talk about morality because it's a huge issue. Because if all morals are relative, that we make up our morals, then there is no evil. He's talking about evil next week. He'll probably touch upon that. The whole concept that what is evil? If there is no such thing as morality, then you can't define evil. There is no such thing as good then. And if you can't define good, then you have no argument against evil. And Gary, I'm sure next week will go into detail on that. And then I'm going to touch on that topic for a full evening. So it's a great question, and that's why it's on my list of things to do.
And one problem with relativism is who gets to decide. They call that the says who question. And there's a Duke law professor, Arthur Leff, L-E-F-F, and you can look him up and read this article. It's kind of lengthy, but he talks about, so who gets to decide morality? Is it the Supreme Court? Is it the United Nations? Because whoever you go to, there's always going to be a complaint there saying, well, there's got to be somebody beyond that because we're all just people. Who gets to make that final decision? It all ends up arbitrary if there's not a standard beyond. It's like bowling. Nobody gets to make up the idea of bowling, throwing a ball here, throwing a ball there, counting at 50, counting at 20, counting at 10. There's got to be the American Bowling Association or whatever they call it. They got to have their book so that you say, no, that was only 10 points or that was only 3 points. Otherwise, it's chaos. Everybody gets to decide how they want to bowl.
So if you don't mind, we'll delay that a few weeks, and we're going to get to that question. Anything else? Tracy, wait for the mic if you don't mind. Hold your hand up so we can see who he's giving it to.
Yeah, I forgot. Tracy's wants to announce that we've got a big event coming up. It's called AMP, A-M-P. It's put on by Reasons to Believe. It's a science faith organization. What are the dates for that, Trey?
That's coming up February 23rd and 24th. So it begins 4 p.m. Friday afternoon and runs Friday evening and then through the day on Saturday. And this year it is up in San Dimas at Christ's Church of the Valley. So if you're interested, all you have to do is Google AMP Conference 2018 and you'll get all the details.
in mind, it'll be from an old Earth perspective, probably as far as Genesis and stuff like that goes.
Let me close in prayer here. And think of questions as you come into. Oh, you got one, Cornell?
Cornell's got one.
All right, we can't leave Cornell hanging here. He wasn't here last week, and so I complained about it, so he's here.
Okay, I believe. So what are the true marks of a church that I should go to? How do I find a church to go to? What church do I go to? Does Emanuel Faith have the true belief? Does Escondido CRC have the true belief? Does the Baptist church down the road? How do I find that? And how do I know, since I'm a brand new believer, how do I know that if I come here, I'm being taught the true gospel?
The easiest answer is the belief that matches or comes closest to the story of reality. That was our book last year, The Story of Reality. The one that matches reality the best.
But my reality has been screwed up for quite a while, so I'm not
Okay,
sure what
that's
reality is.
So we have a standard, we have a book, we have a Bible, and we have a history of the church. And that is a tough question in that we've got to have a standard by which to judge. That's why objective truth is so vital. We have to have some sort of standard to answer that question. And so I'm going to say that the Bible's the standard, but that means, Mormons believe in the Bible, so do Jehovah's Witnesses. So what makes us different? Well, there are certain core beliefs of the Christian faith that has been established, right from the beginning. And a good church has to teach those core beliefs, has to believe those core beliefs. If they don't, then you're in a bad church. What are some of those core beliefs? Well, there's only one God. That's a core belief. A church has to believe only one God. You can ask questions of that church. Jesus is fully God, fully man. He's two natures, one person. Now I'm going through what I teach kids, so understand I'm using these hand motions. I teach adults and kids this. Our big problem is sin. So the church has to talk on sin. Okay, that church, if it says God is love and there's no sin, I would walk away from a church that doesn't say that we have broken God's law and that we've been separated from him. That's not a church to go to. Jesus is the Christ. You want to go to a church that teaches that Jesus is the Messiah. He is the Christ. So you don't want to end up in a synagogue because they reject Jesus as the Messiah. But all these I can support in Scripture. Okay, so understand that. I'm going to skip the scriptures to go quickly through this. Jesus is the Christ. We are saved by grace through faith. If you're going to a church that says, oh, you got to be good at this church or you're not going to heaven, walk away. This church, Emanuel Faith, we are saved by grace through faith. And the last one is Jesus rose from the dead. The resurrection was true. Now, if you say any of those six, I don't believe them, then you're not a Christian. And it is not really a Christian church if those six are not in there. Now, there's probably a few others. We could throw in the virgin birth or something like that. But a church has to teach those core doctrines. St. Augustine once said, in essentials, unity. The Christian church has to be unified on essentials. I just gave you 6 essentials. In non-essentials, liberty, age of the earth, end time theology. Those can be all different at different churches. That's okay. Calvinism versus Arminianism. Actually, I'm going to talk on that, if you can believe it. I'm going to take that on. At the end, I'm going to take that on for fun. I think it's fun. Some people get angry. And so those are liberty. So in essentials, unity. In non-essentials, liberty, and in all things, charity. Charity is love. In all things, love. Augustine said that. Augustine wrote in the 4th century. Brilliant man. And so does that help you in choosing a church? You got to choose one that have the core doctrines. And then the other doctrines, that's what makes all these churches different. All these liberty items.
And the churches have statements of faith right on their website, so you can match up
So why aren't they all the same then if they all believe in one God? I mean, it just
Yeah, but
kinda-
I see that as a compliment to God. He allows the liberty and the freedom for us to go where we're the most comfortable. I mean, look at Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Why didn't we just have one gospel? Because each one saw things differently, reported them differently. And so you got churches where people come in flip-flops and shorts and are very comfortable. Other people want the incense going, and that's fine. There are a lot of people that just feel more comfortable, I think, in a particular setting.
And you just can't vary on those core doctrines. The other stuff, they can vary. But the core doctrines, and you say, why are there people against those core doctrines? Well, there were idol worship in the Old Testament. God got angry at that. And people are religious but not Christians because they violate those core doctrines. They want to make up the religion of their own. Yeah, we got to go. Our time is up. The clock is up. If we'll stick around afterwards, if you have any questions, let's pray. Father, we don't have all the answers. Only you do. But God, we thank you for the gifts you've given us and for the people here. I hope that this has been valuable and you have been honored, and that individuals here will leave tonight ready to talk to somebody about Jesus, to be an ambassador this week. And we just thank you for this turnout, and we ask for all this in your Son's name, Jesus Christ. Amen.
Nobody ever answered that question about miracles. What do you say?